I'm Steve Coll. I'm the author of Private Empire, ExxonMobil American Power. Wear lots of other hats too, but that's the main one at the moment. Yeah, well, when I first started, one of the first things I did was travel to West Africa, because once I kind of mapped out where their oil and gas holdings were and where my interests were likely to lie, I thought West Africa would be an important part of the story. So I went out. Chad was one of the places I visited and worked. And as I was going around the country and trying to understand ExxonMobil's presence there, the biggest question I had is, why are they here? Why are they here at all? Because this is, an enormous corporation with deep financial resiliency. And here's Chad, really, the bottom of the world tables in quality of life indicators. Life expectancy is still under 50 years. So it's not even, Nigeria looks like, Holland by comparison. And so the answer as to why they're there, why they gravitate to an environment like that, is actually of real importance. And it has to do with the basic dilemmas that they face in their business. In the 1950s and 60s and 70s, a company like Exxon didn't even bother to count up how much oil and gas it owned in the world, because it owned so much. They had a piece of Saudi Aramco, which meant they owned Saudi Arabia's bounty. They had a piece of the Iranian National Oil Company, the Iraqi National Oil Company. And they were producing the big pools of safe oil in a production sense, easy to market, and at least at the time, politically stable. In the 1970s, resource nationalism and expropriations threw them out of all of these big pools of safe oil. And they basically started to face a dilemma they'd never faced before, which is how to replace the oil that they pump and sell each year so that they don't shrink, because their whole business model is based on ownership. They're not a service company. They're not like someone you hire to renovate your house. They want to own the oil and gas in the ground. That's how Wall Street values them. And they produce 4.5 million barrels of oil and gas equivalent a day. Multiply that times 365 days, that's 1.5 billion barrels they've got to find every year just to stay even. Now, once they got thrown out of the Middle East because of nationalism and anti-colonial attitudes, and those attitudes spread all over the world in post-colonial societies, there really were not that many places they could own oil and gas anymore. They could own it in the free market West, where property rights are sacrosanct, North America, Australia, and Europe, but there's not much oil and gas there anymore. It's all been pumped out and used. And that drove them basically into weak states. That's why they're in Africa, because these are states that are too weak, do not have the national capacity to assert their own nationalism over oil. In most of the Arab world, foreign corporations are not allowed to own oil because there's a national attitude that this is a special national resource. It's not like any other property. It belongs to our people. It's a source of national pride. We're not giving it to Exxon. And in Chad, I would imagine some of that same sentiment, if it could come forward, is probably present in the minds of Chadians, but they don't have a government that could do it themselves, which is what the Middle Eastern governments did. They built their own strong national oil companies. They operate and they own the oil. They hire Westerners for technical service support the way we would hire a contractor to renovate our house, but they do not allow the contractor to own the oil. In Chad, basically, they can't build such a national oil company, so they invite ExxonMobil in and they say, look, will you pump it out of the ground? We'll let you own some of it too. We'll split it 50-50. So ExxonMobil ends up in these weak states where they can actually own the oil and gas in the ground. And these are large reserves, especially Nigeria and Angola. So that's why they're there. And the irony is that this kind of map of the way the world looks to them and the imperative of constantly replacing the reserves they produce every year is driving them into settings of instability. And here's this company that's very rule-bound, very rigid, very focused on trying to wring all risk out of their daily operations to the extent engineers can figure out how to do it. But their business model is driving them into risk. So they're in countries that are much more unstable than they would like, but they have no choice but to be there. Yeah, no, I mean, I think they would wish to be in more stable places for the reasons you cite, and um, but they, as they would put it, we have to go where the oil is. Well, you have to go where the oil is, and you can own it, and that takes you to Chad. But I think what you say is correct. The one thing that's so striking in Chad is very vivid there, but it's true in other countries where they operate. They're now operating in Papua New Guinea, for example. In the most poor societies where they work, their influence is so outsized that it really changes the equation. Chad, for example, when this agreement that Chad put together with the World Bank and the Clinton administration and ExxonMobil facilitated it, ultimately didn't sign up as a party to the agreement to use their oil revenues to promote social development goals. And then that deal fell apart in 2006, and Idris Deby, the president, basically bought his way out of the World Bank obligations by repaying loans early. Now, he could do that because in that year, 2006, 2007, ExxonMobil's tax and royalty revenue to Chad was in the order of $750 million a year. That's basically 1/4 of the national budget, all in, for 11 million people. And it's by comparison, the United States government's embassy in Chad that same year was doling out a maximum of about $10 million in aid. So, if you're Deby and you look across the Capitol and you see the embassy on the one hand and ExxonMobil's country representative office, who actually represents American Power, theoretically the embassy could call in the Marines, I suppose, in a way that ExxonMobil could not. But otherwise, ExxonMobil is the government, and in the South, they really are a much more powerful representative of sovereignty, order, and development strategy than either the state of Chad or any other aid government that's trying to provide aid. That is true, and I think it's a problem myself. They don't, but I think what they would say is that their core competency is oil and gas production. They're not an international aid agency. They wouldn't be a good one if they tried to be. They're not a charitable organization. They do give to charity, but in a measured way. Their view is that the best way to let market forces lead West Africa out of poverty is for ExxonMobil to stick to the things it does well, produce oil and gas profitably, pay its law-abiding taxes and royalties to the host governments in copious amounts, and let those host governments figure out how to govern their own people, and not to have ExxonMobil get into the business of substituting for their role just because they're weak. If they're weak, then other governments should be helping those governments come forward, et cetera, et cetera. So that's their kind of argument. We're just here to do the thing that we know how to do, and we produce revenue that other people should use to achieve these worthy goals. We're not saying the goals aren't worthy. We're just saying they're not our goals. Yeah, they do some of that because they give, about I think in the most recent year, 0.5% of their total net profits to charity, and some of that flows into the countries where they operate in West Africa, and the projects they do are, well selected in some cases. Malaria eradication, Equatorial Guinea is certainly a good thing for them to be involved in with others, and they work with NGOs and those kinds of charitable things. But what they don't do is show long-term leadership of the sort that they show where their business interests or that are on the line, or leadership comparable to the Gates organization. I mean, the Gates Foundation says, these are our goals, millennium goals or health goals. We're going to invest and show leadership, bring other partners to the table. We're going to insist that we move the needle, and if we try one road and doesn't work, we're going to shift and go in another direction. We're going to get there because these are long-term and deeply important goals, and we're committed to them. ExxonMobil could articulate that, and my view is that it's fine to have a normal corporate responsibility charity profile in many environments where ExxonMobil works. Let their shareholders and their employees debate whether their rate of giving at less than 1% is acceptable to them when Walmart's doing 5% and Target's doing 7%. Okay, those are retail companies. Maybe that's best seen as marketing. But in any event, they're in the game, and in most settings, they can, I think, defend their record of social investments and employee risk, but it's a very good place to work. Maybe they're not as generous on the charitable side. However, in my view, there are some settings where they come of their own free will to Chad to make money pumping oil out of the ground. If they would drive out of their fenced compounds and out of their security perimeters and go down these seasonal muddy roads and see the conditions that people are living in with life expectancy of 50 years and recognize that they are the international power in Chad as the lead operator of this consortium, more influential than the United States government, probably more influential than the French. And they're in a position where they have the organizational strengths to achieve complicated targets. That's what they do. I mean, they could say, you know what, standard operating procedure just isn't good enough in Chad. When life expectancy is under 50 years and we've been here 10 years and we have made X millions of dollars for ourselves, it's just not good enough. You know, we're going to have to do something. In some of these settings, we're going to have to do more because we're here. And I think other corporations do start with that premise. It doesn't make it easy to achieve something, but I find it unpersuasive, ExxonMobil's idea that, well, we're not very good at that. Actually, they're the most efficient, best organized institution of any kind inside Chad's borders. So if they wanted to show leadership to say, all right, these are the things we think we can achieve. We can lead the international community to build the following number of rural health clinics and make sure they're staffed with well-trained nurses and rotating doctors. And we are going to commit ourselves to take a leadership role, not the sole provider, but we're going to get international aid organizations, international governments, NGOs, and others. We're going to get everybody rowing in the same direction. We're going to set targets, and we're going to deliver change in these communities. They could do that. It wouldn't be that expensive either.